All right, hello everybody. This video is part of the Hart House Outreach Initiative video series of Introduction to Debate, where we'll be covering different aspects of debate. So in this video, we'll be focusing on the introduction to British Parliamentary, the common style of debate in the university circuit, and you can find more videos on the Hart House Facebook page after this video. So I'm Katelyn.
I'm Nikitha.
And we'll be your host today for this seminar. So let's hop right into it. All right, so again, this video is going to be on the introduction to BP and basic aspects of it, such as speaker roles, team roles, and time management. So just to begin with the basics, what is British Parliamentary? BP stands for British Parliamentary, which is a style that, unlike Canadian Parliamentary, actually features 4 teams, 2 teams which comprise the government bench, which support the resolution, and 2 teams which comprise the opposition bench who oppose the resolution. Each team has 2 members each, so the debate will have a total of 8 members. There is an opening half, so when I talk about the 2 benches being government and opposition, there will be 2 of those teams which will be the front half and 2 of those teams which will be the back half. The length of the speech durations are 7-minute speeches in the university, which is different than the high school standard of 5 minutes. However, for the Central Novice tournament, which is at the beginning of the year, they entail 5-minute speech lengths. So in terms of resolutions, a resolution in debate is a statement that will be essentially the main topic or the thesis that is being debated. So as I've mentioned previously, there's going to be a bench supporting the resolution and there's going to be a bench opposing the resolution. So essentially government will agree with whatever the statement is suggesting and opposition will be against it. In debate, there are a couple acronyms that are utilized to shorten the first half of the resolution, which are outlined on the screen. So just to explain some of them, the most common one is probably THW, which stands for This House Would. An example of this would be This House would buy a dog rather than a cat. So it's very action-oriented, it's practical, it focuses on real outcomes of a specific action. The next one is THBT, which stands for This House Believes That. Recognized as opposed to the would motion, a believes that motion is more principally based, more theoretical. So an example of this is This House believes that dogs are better than cats. So recognize that the nuance entailed in this resolution is specifically looking at the benefits of dogs over cats in theory, in principle, rather than the actual practical outcomes of buying a dog and what that, on the consequences that would be entailed as a result. The next resolution on the screen is THR, which stands for This House Regrets, and then THP, which is This House Prefers. And these two are kind of like 2 sides of the same coin in a sense, one being the positive and one being the negative. So in a This House Regrets motion, the example is This House regrets the domestication of cats as pets, versus the prefers motion being This House prefers a world in which cats did not exist and dogs were the only house pet. Essentially, both of those just look at a comparison of different worlds where something existed versus something did not exist. So if you're regretting something existed, you wish that that thing never existed in the first place and the world was better off just without it being there. And if you prefer it, it means you prefer it over something else.
Okay, so then we're going to get into the teams in the debate and what kind of roles they serve. First team to speak will be opening government. And their role in the debate, they generally will model the debate. So that means they're going to define the terms, make it clear what we're talking about, what the plan might be for whatever policies they wanted to implement. Then they're going to provide a constructive case. That just means a bunch of points, usually 2 to 3 arguments with a bunch of development, and then the second speaker will refute opening opposition's case. And what that means is basically they're just going to tell you why all of opposition points are wrong.
Yeah, so similarly, the opening opposition has a similar purpose and role to opening government. They also have to provide the constructive case for the opposition side, comprising of 2 to 3 arguments. And they also have to refute opening government in terms of saying why they're wrong. They can also provide a counter model. However, we'll be discussing that a little bit later.
Closing government is going to provide an extension. So will closing opposition. Basically, what an extension means is that it has to be a bunch of new material to the debate. You can't say the same thing as your opening team. That's called being derivative. Keep in mind, you also don't want to say the exact opposite and say they're all wrong. That's called knifing. So find a happy medium in the middle, come up with some new analysis, and that will be your constructive case. and then you're also going to refute both of the other teams on the other bench. And finally, the last speaker is going to do a summary of the debate and explain to the judge why that closing team should win the debate.
So in terms of the speakers, as I mentioned in the introduction basics, each team has 2 speakers, and each speaker actually has unique responsibilities that they have to fulfill in their speech. So we'll be covering that in this section over here. So just to begin with opening half, the opening half is comprised of opening government and opening opposition. And the first speaker of the opening government is called the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister has a few responsibilities, which are outlined on the slide. The first one is to model the resolution. So modeling entails a few things. So firstly, you have to define the house. So as mentioned previously with the reading resolutions, each resolution will have a house. So remember, this house would, this house believes that, and essentially the house can be any actor that from whose perspective you're debating the ground. So for instance, a common actor that the house could be is like Western liberal democracies, for instance, the government of Canada, the provincial government of Ontario, etc., etc. The house could also be an individual in cases where there is an individual making a decision and you have to debate what is best for that individual. So remember, the perspective of the debate does depend on the house because remember, you are debating from that person's perspective. So ultimately you want to benefit them, right? So in terms of defining the resolution, not only do you define the house, you can also define key terms within the resolution and also sometimes explaining how these things will look in practice, especially more complicated propositions such as like mandated organ donation. Sometimes you'd have to provide how that would look like, what perhaps compensation might look like, et cetera, who would be the person that's collecting it? Like, would it be like standardized hospitals? Would it be the government? Would it be private organizations? These things matter because those stakes will affect the certain consequences that will be discussed during the round. Secondly, you can also do a little bit of characterization and framing. And essentially what this looks like is just basically defining the goals or the intentions of the round, specifically from your side or just in general, what the ultimate goal should be. Like what should all the teams be working towards? What's the ultimate benefit that you guys are all trying to reach? And then after that, you're also responsible for introducing the government case, which is comprised of 2 to 3 arguments. It doesn't need to be 2 to 3 exactly. It could be even like 1 to 2, for instance, but it could be a little bit more multi-tiered. So it really depends on your case, but it should be enough to fill your entire speech and to give a pretty strong opening to your government bench as to why we should support the resolution. Next is the Leader of Opposition. So the Leader of Opposition has some similar responsibilities to the Prime Minister, both of them being first speakers. So they can counter-model or do some framing as well. So counter-modeling is sometimes entailed when the government insufficiently models or model something that is unrealistic. So if they model something that makes it seem like it lightens their burden too much, so basically makes it too easy for them to debate the resolution, then you could counter model with something that's a little bit more realistic, that sets a little bit more of a fair debating ground, if you will. You are responsible as the Leader of Opposition to introduce the opening opposition case. So that looks like 2 to 3 arguments again. And then lastly, you also have to refute what the Prime Minister said. So being that you came after the Prime Minister, you are going to refute them. And refuting, as Nikhil mentioned before, is just explaining why they are wrong. It's a good rule of thumb to basically think that you are refuting anybody who is not part of your bench who has spoken before you.
Although the Prime Minister and the Leader of Opposition have pretty different roles, the rest of the speakers in this debate are going to have pretty similar things to do. So the deputies are going to refute what the other side said. That's the first thing that usually they'll want to do. And the second thing they're going to do is rebuilding. Rebuilding can be done 2 different ways. You can either refute the refutation, so explain why their refutation is wrong, or they can add additional analysis or materials to further prove their point. So if the refutation from the other team is saying that something is lacking in their previous characterization, they might want to add those things in to make their case stronger. You can also add an additional argument in the deputy speech, but make sure that you introduce that additional argument, earlier on in your speech, gives people more time to respond to it.
So on the closing half, the first speaker are called the member speeches. So there's the member of government and the member of opposition. And I'll be basically combining the roles because they're pretty much the exact same. So the primary role of the member speaker is to provide the extension to their respective bench's case. So if you're the member of government, you're going to extend the government case, and if you're the member of opposition, you're going to extend the opposition case. And what an extension looks like, it can entail a number of many things. Firstly, the most common extension is just a new argument. So something that hasn't been mentioned previously that supports your side, you can mention it, you can analyze it, and you can provide it to the round. Secondly, you can also provide additional new analysis to an existing argument, but you just need to make sure that it is differentiated and distinct. So you need to make sure that you are contributing new and meaningful material rather than just copying what the front half has already stated. So differentiation is very important, because otherwise, if you sound too similar to your front half, you will be called out as derivative and the judge won't give you as many points for whatever content you're providing. So again, you can provide new analysis, but you need to make sure you flag how it's different and how it adds on to how your front half has already contributed to the round. Thirdly, you can provide a new case study which augments the round, or you can also do refutation to contribute to the round in a new way as well. So essentially, remember that the extension's purpose is just to contribute in a novel and meaningful way and to bring the debate further than it was previously. So to do that, you can reframe the debate too. So this entails looking at the debate in a different lens. So for instance, if front half focused heavily on the economic side of a debate resolution, you can look at the social aspect, how it affects people instead of how it affects the economy. And you can also look at the debate in slightly new ways in terms of looking at new actors. So if they specifically worked at like families, you can look at how it affects like business owners. Like something you do need to be careful as a member speaker is, while you are refuting all speakers that have come before you that are from the opposite bench. So if you're the member of government, that involves the opening opposition teams, both speakers. You also have to make sure that when you're differentiating, you don't knife your front half. So if you're trying to establish yourself as better than your front half, you can't say that they're explicitly wrong. Even if your front half like flat out lied, you can't say that they're wrong because that's considered knifing.
So the last speakers in the debate are the whip speeches. So essentially the role of a whip speaker is to summarize the debate thematically. I'd call it like a biased summary. So all that does is say what happened in the debate and then prove that your closing team won the debate. A couple of notes: you should not introduce any new content, especially in the opposition whip. In the government whip, remember you're the only person that could respond to the closing opposition case. So sometimes you might want to do explicit refutation. Other times you might want to integrate that refutation into your summary speech. So yeah, so let's talk about summary speeches for a little bit. The first way you could do it is thematically. You can come up with a couple of big concepts that occurred in the debate that summarize most of the points and explain why your closing team won on those points. The other way you can do it is do it just team by team and go through all the teams and explain almost as if you're telling the judge how they should judge the round, and you say why you win and any other rankings that you might want to slide in there. Time management is just the way that you organize your speech in order to ensure that everything you want to say comes across and you don't leave anything out. Each speaker has a different way of time managing because they all have different roles, as we've gone over. So for example, the Prime Minister has no refutation, no rebuilding to do. They just have constructive points, and they have to model the round and some characterization and framing. So a good tip, probably keep the model framing like a minute, maybe a little over a minute if it's a pretty complicated round, and then spend the rest of the time on point construction. Division of points depends on how big your points are, to be honest. But ideally you want to get more balanced points. So maybe like spend 2 to 3 minutes on each point if you have 2, 2 minutes on each point if you have 3. Try to make them even and less they're not. Okay, so the LO doesn't have any rebuilding to do. I'd recommend a time split of probably around 4 minutes for constructive and 3 minutes for refutation. It could change, like if the PM has a monster case, then you really have to spend a lot of time refuting it, then go with 4, maybe even 4.5 minutes. If there's not much there, then spend a lot of time constructing your case. Play it by ear. And then with the deputy speeches, between refutation and rebuilding, once again, 3 or 4 minutes for each, depending on how the rounding is going. But if you're offering a new constructive point, keep that new constructive point to 1 or 2 minutes tops, because refutation and rebuilding are really important, because especially for the DPM, it's your only chance for your team to do either of those things in the round. Then for the extension speaker, you probably want to spend like a good 5 minutes on your extension, and then the other 2 minutes on refutation, because your speech is the only speech in which you can get out new material. And then whip speakers are like, do what you want, I guess. Like, if you're doing themes, try to split your themes evenly so it seems like your themes are equally important. If you're doing team by team, spend time on whichever team seems the strongest and you have to take down the most. Don't spend 4 minutes bashing the team that has already lost the debate. That is generally it for time management. One thing we didn't go over was POIs, which are crucial to debate. POIs stand for points of information, and they're just basically short 10 to 15 second quips of refutation that you can offer during someone else's speech. They choose whether to accept you or not. If they accept you, then you'll give your short bit of refutation and they have to respond in real time. It makes the debate more engaging, more fun.
So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching the entire thing. If you did, that's awesome. If you didn't, that's okay too. Take what you need and leave the rest, I guess. So stay tuned for more Hart House debating videos, which will be released on the Hart House Facebook page.